Well, everybody, it's been 12 weeks since I've been up here helping you guys out learn something, hopefully. And feels like a bit of a sabbatical almost, which is good because I had a lot of stuff with school and everything going on, and I finally feel like I'm caught up. But we're going to start off a 6-week lesson series called Planning the Exodus. And the first one we're going to be working on today is kind of just all about plans. So you can see here we got 3 different sections we're going to be talking about. We're going to talk about God's plan. We're going to talk about Abram and the plan that God had for him. And we're going to talk about a word you've probably never seen before. By show of hands, how many of you have seen that 6-letter word for step 3? In section 3. Hyksos. 1. Okay. That means everyone should learn something today, and that's good for a Sunday school lesson. To start us off in the first part with God's plan, I'm going to ask you the question that's kind of at the top of your sheet about misconceptions. What was a misconception or misunderstanding that you've had for a long time? Now, I've got some up on the board that you may not be familiar with, or maybe you are familiar that these are misconceptions we're commonly kind of stuck with in life. Your teacher probably taught you some of these. But a long time ago, people, when they got frostbite, they would take snow, fresh snow, and they'd put it on the frostbite thinking it would help. It doesn't. It doesn't. Or you got a burn, and your mom's like, oh, grab the butter. You don't want to put oil on a burn, ever. It doesn't help. Now, maybe it does something else. Maybe the salt in the butter helped keep it clean, but the actual butter doesn't help the burn. And when you were a little kid, your teacher probably taught you to draw raindrops, and they were tear-shaped. But it's really easy to see with slow-motion cameras now. Only tears leave that little trail on your face. Raindrops, when they fall, are circular. Or blue blood. How many of you were taught blue blood? How many of you taught at some point in your life that the veins in your arms are blue because your blood was blue? I had a teacher tell me this. I remember from being a little kid, they said, your blood was blue. Your blood's never been blue. It's red. It's just bright red or dull red. It's never been blue. Or that you only use 10% of your brain. Maybe at any given second of your life, you only use 10% of your brain, but your brain is a crazily amazing hardwired piece of equipment that goes all the way back and forth, and there's all kinds of signals all the time. If you only use 10% of it, you're not a very smart fellow. Not trying to be mean. Most of us are much beyond that. And bats are blind. How many of you thought bats were blind or at least partially blind? Bats dislike the day because they're night hunters and because they don't want to be seen, kind of like owls or fox and different things. It doesn't mean you can't see them during the day, but they're not blind. In fact, if you were to go to a cave right now, Sherry, this would not be a pleasant experience as my guess, but if you walked into a cave and the bats just started flying at you, if you just stood really still, you'd never be hit because they're not blind. They're just not. But we were told, blind as a bat. It's a phrase we use in our culture, and it's just not true. Water in a camel's hump. Sorry, it's fat. Not water. It's fat. Camels just have a really unique way of sweating or not sweating. It allows them to store water really well. And how many of you thought, even today, when you walked in, that different parts of your tongue are for different parts of flavors? They're not. It's just not true. Your taste buds are multifaceted and varied, and while you may notice some things more strongly in some places, it's probably because you drink coffee and you burned half of the other ones off. It's not part of it. We have all kinds of misconceptions about what life should be and what's really going on. And so today, write a few down at the top that maybe you had or have before we get started, because misconceptions is kind of what today is about. We think we know what's really supposed to be going on, but do we really know what's supposed to be going on? See, when you talk about the Exodus, there's a lot of opinions out there. Some people, straight up fairy tale, fake, made up totally, it's a fancy story to tell children at their bedtime. Some people think, well, it was inspired by another real life event, but they kind of copied and pasted and changed some things. Some people say it's impossible, could not have happened. There was no Exodus, there will be no Exodus. That's a bunch of nonsense. A few people say, well, it happened, but it wasn't, the Bible embellished a little bit or changed some things, got some facts wrong. And there's a group of people, and I'm guessing most of you kind of fit in this last category, where you would believe that God led an exodus of people out of Egypt into a land of promise. That's my guess. That's what the Bible says it is, and so many of you who might believe in the Bible would say this. You have enemies, though. And not just your enemies, they're your kids' enemies, and your neighbors' enemies, and your friends' enemies. And some of your friends, neighbors, and kids don't read a Bible. And so if they can get somebody else to tell them these things aren't true, or prove that they're not true, it's going to cause problems. One of my favorite verses in the entire Bible is when Jesus declares, I'm the way, the truth, and the life. He says this as a matter of fact. He is the way, the truth, and the life. And if the enemy of your soul can convince you that he tells lies, or that he's not the way, it messes with things. Because if Jesus isn't the way, if there's another way to get into heaven, then you don't need Jesus. And if he can convince you that everything Jesus said, well, one of them wasn't quite true, not everything was 100% true, well, then guess what? As somebody who claims to be the truth, right? Not somebody who tells truth. Shawnee, I'm sure you mean to tell the truth most of the time, but you're human. I know that you might make a mistake. I totally get that. But if you claimed I am the truth, then everything that comes out of your mouth must be true. And if it wasn't, how much of what we hear Shawnee say should be believed? I wouldn't believe any of it probably, right? And so if the devil can convince you that something Jesus said was wrong, then, of course, why would you believe anything he says? And the same thing is true about life. If Jesus doesn't give us life, why hang with Jesus? We're going to die anyway. Might as well go have fun. That's an attitude you guys have heard, I'm sure, many, many times. So this is the problem then. If this is a fiction, if Exodus really is a fiction, and my goal today is to help you get some of the founding you would need to fight back against somebody who would say, well, that's impossible. It's fake. It's not even plausible. If it's a fiction, the Exodus, the history of Jacob and his descendants, and the miraculous power of God would all be nothing. And if any of those are not something, then they're nothing now too. If our God now could not save them back then, what chance do we have now with the internet? It just would be impossible. It lays the groundwork for everything we need to know. And Jesus talks about all three of these things as if they are history. He quotes from them as historical time periods and events, not as stories. We say, well, you remember the story of Noah? And Jesus would say, do you remember Noah? Because it wasn't, we say it as a story, not to say it's make-believe, but we tell it as a story to our kids maybe. Sunday school or in a lesson. But Jesus talked about these things as if they happened literally. And so if they happen literally, we should really pay attention to them. You see, that picture there, that's just proof of God's real plans. God is a planning God. I don't know if you knew this. God makes plans. In Isaiah 55, and at the little bottom you see there's a little star that says check out the full text. If you go back to the website, the full text is listed. You can go find what we're using for our key verse here. But so shall my word that goes forth from my mouth, it shall not return to me void, but it shall accomplish what I please. God's got some ideas in mind, some things he wants to do, and his word will accomplish those things. And it shall prosper in the thing for which I sent it. When his word came out of his mouth and he had a plan in mind, this is what I want my word to do, it will not just do the thing, it will prosper the thing, whatever it was. If God said it, you can believe it, put it in the bank. And we see in Jeremiah 29, not only does God have these plans, but for I know the thoughts that I think toward you, says the Lord, thoughts of peace and not of evil, to give you a future and a hope. Carrie, have you ever heard somebody ask the question, if God's such a good guy, why does he let evil stuff happen? This is the verse you come back at them with. It's like an apologetics thing. If somebody asks you that, why does God let it? You would say in Jeremiah 29, God thinks towards you often, and his thoughts are of peace, a future, and a hope. chances are if there's evil in your life, God may allow some of it, but he didn't put it there. The evil in my life wasn't put there by God. I don't want to name names, but it wasn't God. Jesus never put an evil thing in my life. But there are a lot of evil things I've come up against, and God didn't put them there. In Isaiah 46, and again, there's another one you want to check out if you want to look at all the verses for this, but it says, remember the former things of old. One of the reasons we want to talk about the Exodus is because it is one of these former things of old. And in it, God says, for I am God, and there is no other. There's no other God to go look to. There's no other God to check out or to... Those things fade away. We don't worship Egyptian gods for a reason. They have no lasting power. I am God, and there's none like me, is declared. And in Job 5, it says, he frustrates the devices of the crafty. How many of you know somebody who's a little crafty? They try and work things to their benefit. Right? I always feel like Dave Fish was one of these kinds of guys. Like, well, I got a plan. I got this thing going on. I'm going to make it work. And that plan may have involved dumpster diving up at Sears. I don't know. It's one of those weird things. He would tell the stories about these kinds of things. And he always had a kind of a plan to make things work out. Dave was a character, right? A character. And people do this, though. But these devices, God oftentimes will frustrate them. So that their hands cannot carry out their plans. So when we make plans, sometimes God says, nope, pump the brakes on that one. Slow down on that. But there are other kinds of plans. The Lord brings the counsel of the nations to nothing. You can vote how you want to vote. When it comes right down to it, if God doesn't like what's going on, he puts a stop to it. He makes the plans of people to no effect. Even if the person you didn't like got in, they won't get anything done. The counsel of the Lord stands forever. His counsel is the one that is everlasting. The plans of his heart to all generations. We study old things to see what God did for them, partially because it applies to how he might do things for us. Proverbs 16:9, a man's heart plans his way. Mace, you got plans. I know you do. Goals, things you want to get done, places you want to be, how you see yourself in 5 years. And those are good things. Proverbs declares you're going to have plans in your heart. But the success rate is the second part. But the Lord directs his steps. You can fight God all you want. You're going to be frustrated to no end. You might as well let him at least guide some of those steps, no matter what your plans are. In Proverbs 19, it says, there are many plans in a man's heart, nevertheless the Lord's counsel, that will stand. When you get God in with what you're trying to do, when God's with you, who can be against you? And finally, for plans that God would put together, Lord, you will establish peace for us. I love this part. You have also done all your works for us. All our works, not your works, our works. Bill, you had a successful business for years. I don't think it would have been without God's help. I really don't. I bet if we were to sit down and talk to you, interview style, and I asked you questions about that, you could go on for hours about all the times God made it happen when you couldn't do it yourself. I'm sure you could tell the times man got in the way and frustrated your plans too. It's one of those things. We've got all these things going for us, and God is there to establish peace in our lives. And everything we have done, God came alongside and helped us with. Anything good comes from above. If it's good in your life, God's in it. And that's crazy to me. So now we move on to the second part. We got to see how God was in Abram's life. This is before he was Abraham, so we got to look at that. Because we're going to talk about the Exodus. You might think, well, we're going to jump right in. This is when the plagues show up, or this is when the Pharaoh decided to not let the people. No, it's way before that. God's plans don't start on a random Tuesday when things look nasty. God's been in it from the beginning. He's in it yesterday. He's in it today. He'll be in it tomorrow. So when we talk about the Exodus, we got to go back a bit, because sources that we look at matter. We want to see how things line up. And I've talked to some people, and they think the only thing you need is the Bible. If I had the Bible, I wouldn't need anything else. And you know what? If your only goal is to go to heaven, you're right. I would agree with you. If you think I only need the Bible to get to heaven, you would be right. But how many of you have neighbors who don't go to church? How many of you have coworkers who don't believe in God? How many of you got relatives that kind of gotten a little twisted in their attitude maybe, or gotten a little bitter about some things? They need more than the Bible. If the Bible was enough to keep them here, they'd be here, wouldn't they? So they might need a little bit more. So we want to look at some other things too to kind of balance that out and check those with the Bible itself. So I marked the two up here that are the strongest, which is the archaeological records, especially when they dig it up and no one's been able to mess with it for a while. It's pretty obvious that what was there is there. And it's funny that the archaeological record has never yet once disproven the Bible. Not in location, not in name, not in the people who were there, not in what they were doing. We're going to look at, because it's in Egypt, Egyptian records, of course, and then we've got to look at historical sources, and then we've already been looking at the Bible a little bit too. We have to start somewhere with the Exodus to figure out when it happened. As many scholars as there are that many people who have opinions about the Exodus. It's like country music. How many of you are country music fans? You could listen to some country music, throw it on the radio. Not saying young, old, new, whatever hip-hoppy version, the nonsense they got now. But I'm saying, like, in general, the brand country music. Like, you like that genre. How many of you are not country music fans? Okay. Everyone has a different taste on this kind of stuff, right? It's no different than looking at the Exodus. There are people out there who are like, Exodus, whatever, a bunch of hooey nonsense. And there are people like, oh, no, the Exodus, that's where it's at. That's where it's at. Like, you understand the Exodus, so much makes sense. And they love it. And so it goes back and forth. But today I'm going to try and help you understand why the Exodus might matter more than you thought it did. Back in the day, scholars really had a hard time figuring out what was going on, because when it comes to David and Solomon, the dates in the Bible, other than that they reigned for 40 years, are very sparse, and they don't match up with any real-world events that other people can pin to on like a timeline. Some people don't even think David existed, because they don't see enough marks of him outside of the Bible. Which makes sense, because the Bible is the historical document of the Israelites. It makes sense that in Israel you would find parts of the Bible. But if you won't believe the Bible, then of course you can't find much for David. That's just how it is. But Solomon is a little bit different. He expanded some of that and talked with other nations more. And because of those two, it's really difficult to figure out what's going on. So we have to bring in some non-biblical sources to kind of pin some dates down. And the one that they really typically like to get and say this is the date is the temple. It's really hard to deny the temple's date. A lot of other things in the Bible, you're like, I'm not sure. But this one's not. Because of Ahab, actually. Nasty old King Ahab, when he died, it was marked that it happened at a certain time in a certain place at a certain month, and they compared that with a battle of Karkar back in 853. And then they went backwards from there back to 971 based off of the biblical timelines that they have, and they say that Solomon's reign must have begun then in 971. And in the 4th year of Solomon's reign, he built the temple that David had already gotten prepared. Most of it, almost all of it was prepared. The materials were all there. Some of the craftsmanship wasn't quite finished. So in 967, the temple was built, and they did it silently. Not a single construction tool was needed, because it was designed to fit together like Lego blocks. And what's really interesting is that there were people from all over the then known world who helped construct pieces of the temple so it would fit together so beautifully. And one of those people happens to be Hiram, a Phoenician king. He was one of the Levant people next to the Mediterranean. And he got materials from Hiram, and because of these dates, we can verify in 2 or 3 different ways that the temple itself was built in 967. So whether you believe the Exodus is real or not, almost everyone on the planet who's done any research at all agrees that the temple existed and that it was built at that time. So we have a pin. We can say the temple was built. Whether everything else was phony, the temple was built. And then from dating that, we can move backwards. Now we can move backwards because the temple was built, and it was 400 years prior that they came out of they came into the wilderness. They came out of this area of Egypt. And that's really helpful for us to figure this out. And so they moved out of the Goshen region, but that means they were in the Goshen region in the 17th century BC. Now, I don't know about you, but it's hard for me to think backwards. But that's how dates work back then. The bigger the number, the further back in history it was, whereas now the bigger the number it is, the further forward in history we are. So that's a long time ago. Like, almost 4,000 years ago. That's a really long time. Our country was founded less than 250 years ago, and I have a hard time finding good and reliable facts and details about the founding of our own country. Now multiply that times 15. That's a long time ago. And yet, we want to look at some things. So I know the map is tiny. I'm not apologizing for the tiny map. Abraham traveled so far, you have to squint to see everywhere he went. It's that big on a map. If I look at the places I've been, it's not even close. Like, I have to cheat and go by plane. I can't go nearly as far as Abraham did. Now, if you look up on the screen, way over on the side, whichever map you're looking on the far right side, you'll see where he starts. The red line goes to the bottom, way over by what would be considered like Iraq. And he starts in that's where he begins. And he travels north along the rivers, Tigris and Euphrates, and he ends up going through Babylon. And then he cuts and heads full west until he ends up going a little further over, and he makes it into Haran. And then in Haran, he meets his lovely wife. At least it seems like he meets his lovely wife. She's actually a half-sister. So I'm not sure if his dad came with or not, but I have a sneaking suspicion his dad was also a shepherd, and that he also traveled with the watered plains to make his flock grow. But I don't know this, so it's a confusing kind of thing. I'm not sure I love it. But Abraham's an interesting guy. Either way, he meets his lovely wife there, and she was lovely, from what I understand. Maybe the loveliest of all time. If I was 75 and everybody thought I was that good looking, they wanted to marry me. Wanda, you getting suitors knocking on the door all day and night? I think we all wish we could be that lovely at 75, right? It's just, I'm not that lovely now. What am I saying? It's one of those things. So he meets his wife there, and then he and a whole bunch of other people he has with him travel south because God told them travel. So he does. And he takes them with. In Genesis 12 and 5, then Abram took Sarai, his wife, and Lot, his brother's son, his nephew, who Liam just finished up a great series on, right? So we get to find out this kind of piggybacks off of his set. And the possessions they had all gathered. Himself, his wife, Lot, anybody else traveling with them, and the people they had acquired in Haran. Did they buy slaves? Well, maybe not. But workers and servants and people who would help out, right? And Abraham at this point seems to have some well-to-do. I mean, he's 75 at this point. He's got some money. And they departed to go to the land of Canaan. So an Asian man, now don't think, when you say Asian, maybe think like, well, Chinese or something, or Korean or Filipino, but like Indian people are Asian too, right? And Russia, arguably, some people would say is, some parts of that, they would say Asian, because from the continent of Asia. So they're Western Asian, very Western Asian, which would be kind of the Middle East we'd call today. And these people traveled. And so Abraham was one of these people, and he travels, and along the way, he seems to pick up people. He's now got a wife, and he's got his nephew with, and maybe his wife, we don't know. And he's got these other people who he's picked up in Haran. He's kind of collecting people as he goes. Kind of like our church. It's interesting. In Genesis 12, there was a famine in the land of Canaan. So Abram went down to Egypt to dwell there, for the famine was severe in the land. So Abram himself had gone to Egypt with his whole caravan of people and all their livestock. And they were tent dwellings, so they packed up and everything went. Kind of like some of the snowbirds. They up and went, took everything with. It's not a famine in the land maybe here in the winter, but maybe there's another reason they leave. all that snow. Yeah. But he leaves for this reason. He goes to Egypt. In Genesis 15:2, Abraham said, Lord God, what will you give me, seeing I go childless, and the heir of my house is Eliezer of Damascus? Here's another city, another person who's brought in. And he's so close to Abraham. He's like family. In fact, he's the heir to all of Abraham, everything Abraham has. That seems very strange to me, that this person who is not his nearest kin, but somebody from Damascus, is now his. So he's picking up more and more people as he goes. And then in Genesis 15 it says, Then he brought him outside and said, Look now toward heaven. Abraham gets distraught that Eliezer is his heir. This doesn't seem right. Jeremy, this would be like you having your neighbor be your heir of everything you own instead of Mace. And you're like, God, I don't have anybody to give this to. And so you would beg God, God, give me an heir, and then God obviously would give you Mace or something, right? That's how it would work. But he doesn't have anyone. And so he says, I need someone, and God says, look up. And I don't know if God's making fun here. He says, count the stars, if you're able to number them. I don't know how math worked for Abraham. It is very possible he could not count in the thousands because they didn't have a number system to do so. They would have counted numbers of hundreds or numbers of tens or something maybe. But he said, count if you're able to do this. And he said, so shall your descendants be. This is really important because this promise here helps us understand some things in the Exodus. You're going to have so many descendants, you're going to have a hard time counting them. And Abraham looks at God and says, I don't have one yet. Can I get one to start off? In Genesis 15:10-11, God wants to deal with him. Tells Abraham to get a bunch of animals and to cut them in half. And so he brings all these animals and he lays them all out and he cuts them in half. And he puts half on this side and he puts half on this side. And he's getting tired, but some birds come and he has to chase them away. And then the Bible says he lays down and takes a bit of a nap. And strange things happen while he's napping. We don't know if it's a dream or if he woke up to see this. But he has this vision. And in the vision, in Genesis 15, God says, Then he said to Abraham, Know certainly. Again, trust in the plans of the Lord. You can know certainly, this will happen, that your descendants will be strangers in a land. Those descendants that are supposed to be as multitude as the stars are going to be strangers in a land. And that is not theirs. And they will serve them. And they will afflict them for 400 years. At this point in my walk with God, I might reconsider. Lord, help me to be close to you. Help me to do great things. Help me to be somebody of renown. Well, Dan, all your kids and their grandkids and their great-grandkids and their great-great-great-grandkids are going to be slaves over in Canada for the next 400 years. What? No, God, I love you and I want to serve you. Oh, I get it. No, but God, I get it. Slaves, 400 years. But this is why it works. In Genesis 15:14 and 16, and also the nation whom they serve I will judge. God's doing something else with this. Afterward they shall come out with great possessions. Oh, wait. I might be poor, and my kids might have it a little bit harder, but their great-great-great-grandkids are going to be loaded and have life way better and have changed the world? Okay, maybe. I'm still with you, God. But in the fourth generation they shall return here, for the iniquity of the Amorites is not yet complete. I've got a job for them to do then. In fact, 2 birds, 1 stone kind of thing. I'm going to do something here. And I'm going to do something well, and this is the part that gets it. In Genesis 15:17, and it came to pass when the sun went down and it was dark, that behold, there appeared a smoking oven and a burning torch that passed through the pieces. Now, I don't know if you know much about ancient cultures, traditions, but when the animals were split in half, and a covenant with a legal deal was being made, a covenant, the person who walked down between the animals is saying, I will do it, and if I don't do it, the punishment's on me. And on the same day, the Lord made a covenant with Abraham, saying some things. He makes this covenant, and this flaming cook stove and a torch passed down between. Well, it's really interesting. Abraham didn't get up and walk through. See, that sacrifice, the splitting of the animals and the passing of the flame between them, only affects the participant who walks through. And God was the only one who passed through. Which means God is committing to say, I have it covered. Now, Adam, I don't know about you, but if you had trouble buying your house, and you had trouble with your car, and you had trouble with sending your kids to college, and Elon Musk called you up on the phone and said, hey, Adam, I'm cutting you a check today. How much do you need? Oh, no problem. I've got it covered. You might not believe him at first, but if you knew that he was going to do it, would you worry? Why? He's going to do it. He's got it covered. He can afford to, right? It's not a problem. It's not a problem at all. It's like Abraham gets this promise from, it's like when you're a little kid and your dad says like, no, I got it. I got you. You jump, I'll catch you. Now, if your dad lets you go once or twice, you might not trust him. But if your dad got you, swung you around, airplaned you, flipped you in the air, body slammed you down, like you'd be like, oh, my dad's got this. I can jump again. You have this faith in him. And here, God says, I'm the one who passed through. I will take on all the responsibility. Well, the slavery, doesn't matter at that point. If God, who can take care of all things, says, I've got you covered, you might as well just go along with whatever he has for you. Let him lead the steps, as hard as it might be. God's plan in action. God picks Abraham out. He moves him from one place. He sets up the covenant with him, takes full responsibility of it, signs of fire. He knew how he would need to travel, who he's going to bring with him, what kind of materials he would need. In fact, when he stopped in Egypt, he gets extra goodies. When he stops to talk to the king Abimelech, he gets extra goodies. He's blessed. He gets 1,000 pieces of silver. That's not nothing. That's something. Everywhere Abraham goes, God's like, no, I told you, I have this covered. And he not only had it covered, he proved time and time and time again, he was more than covering it. We can go back to the Psalms. He was prospering it. This is a tough place, a tough distance to travel, but he had it covered. And he used his wife in some ways to help this. But the really interesting thing is this. God works all things to the good. Abraham's lying a little bit about his wife, who's his half-sister. It's kind of complicated. But while he's in Egypt, Abraham himself gets to meet the Pharaoh. And the Pharaoh, because of the mistake that was going on, the misunderstanding, hands over more animals and more money and more clothes and more riches. So when Abraham leaves Egypt, he leaves wealthier than he was when he showed up. And the Pharaoh was already doing him a favor by letting him come by and feed his flocks. And God's literally only just gotten started with the Exodus. Not a single person has left Egypt but Abraham. But God's already laying the groundwork. He's already making the plan come to fruition. It's already moving forward. Sometimes we look at our own lives, we think, why do I have to go through this? Why does God make me put up with this nonsense? What if, and I don't think it's an if in my opinion, what if he's just laying some groundwork for your peace and for your success? Now we get to the weird part, the hyksos. The hyksos is an interesting thing. The Exodus is impossible. There's no way a group of people came in and were in charge of anything in Egypt ever. It's unbelievable. It's not even conceivable. Except there was a 100-year period in there where a group of people from Canaan, Semite people, ruled for 100 years in Egypt. And they were called the Hyksos. Now they ruled Lower Egypt, which is actually lower by elevation. It's closer to the ocean. Upper Egypt was further south, and it was higher. It was in the hills. So Egypt couldn't handle it. They kind of broke into parts, and they couldn't maintain both parts of the kingdom, the lower and the upper kingdom. And so the Hyksos were in charge of the lower kingdom. And here's a picture that the Egyptians painted of the Hyksos. And the Egyptian people are on the far right side in their darker skin, topless, brown, traditional Egyptian look. And the Hyksos are the people who are next to them. What do you notice about what they're wearing? Besides that, it's more modest. Can you guys see that well enough? It's interesting to me. The Hyksos are known for shepherding and multicolored clothing. I wonder why Jacob gave his son a coat of many colors. Maybe it was part of their culture. And what's really interesting, this is where it gets interesting in a little bit. I'll show you what Hyksos really means. They appear in the first century, or in the mid-19th century. That's when Abraham would have walked in. So Abraham was going as one of these empowered trading people, this big family with all this retinue, this people that kind of travel with him. He's got, like, they don't have paparazzi back then, but he would have the bodyguards and the soldier, like the people to protect him, and he had this people who run his flocks and keep track of his numbers, and all the people who are in charge of food and setting up camp, and I mean, it was like a wagon train of people. And so he travels on to Egypt, and the first time they show up, the Egyptians literally paint them and carve them into some stones so they're memorialized. You cannot tell me they weren't there. Now, whether he was part of that group or not, we don't know. But there's this guy called Manetho who swears that they were there. And he's an Egyptian. He's one of the Egyptian priests. And he accuses them of coming in and taking the land violently, by force. What does the Bible say? Joseph had a dream. Pharaoh liked the dream. Put Joseph in charge of everything. Does that sound like by force to you? So either Manetho's lying or the Bible is. I'll let you make up your mind on that one. But here we have modern researchers now know that they came peaceably into power. In fact, they don't even think they ruled as a pharaoh in Egypt. They think they shared power with a pharaoh of some kind. Now, maybe that was an Egyptian pharaoh, or maybe it was one of these other Hyksos, one of these other Semite, Canaanite people, maybe an Amorite person or something like that. But either way, they have this power through trade and influence. And the word Hyksos means shepherd kings. That's what it means, shepherd kings. Ultimately, they were overthrown, according to Manetho, and they traveled through a wilderness and settled a place called Judea. So he thought Manetho, an Egyptian historian priest from back before the Greeks had taken over, had written these things down and said that they became the Judea of legend. So he says this is what they did. People modernly want to argue this. Doesn't really matter. They're clearly Canaanites. And as we saw with Abraham, he sort of collects people along his way. Abraham had a lot of different Canaanite people he represented when he traveled. So it still could be them, but maybe it's not. Either way, the grouping matches. And in Genesis 47, Joseph went and he took 5 men from among his brothers and presented them to Pharaoh. And Pharaoh said to his brothers, "What is your occupation? What do you do for a living?" And this is really interesting. He said, "Your servants are shepherds, both we and also our fathers." Did Benjamin have 2 fathers? Of course not. Levi, 2 fathers? No, of course not. Who are they talking about? Who are the fathers they're talking about? Well, I have a hunch it's Abraham and Isaac and Uncle Esau and Jacob and all of his kids, and possibly Abraham's father even. They were shepherds. But they weren't just shepherds. They were shepherd kings. You see, Manetho describes Avaris, the capital of this place, an ancient city and country. The shepherds were given this area. And excavations reveal foreign Semitic population with houses similar to those built in Canaan. And they had weapons like the people of the Mediterranean. And they built pottery like the people of the Mediterranean. And they found in the sacrifice remains a strange absence of pigs. No pigs were found in any sacrifice remains. But there were excessively large food storage silos on site. Does anybody remember the story from when you were in Bible? When you're reading the Bible, you're sitting downstairs in Sunday school. You guys remember the story about Joseph? And the fat cows and the skinny cows? We'll talk a little more about that next week. Another interesting thing is some of the names. Manetho lists 6 kings. And the first one he lists is Yakub. And he has 30 royal scarab seals. We're talking like top-level management scarab seals. with this seal, he has authority to do many, many powerful things. And he's got 30 of them. Most of them are found in Canaan. And Egyptian rulers, scarabs, were found in Canaan. And they date back to the 17th century. And the transliteration in Semitic, of course, is Jacob. Is this the Jacob? Well, I don't know, but it's a weird coincidence. Well, but he's not the only one. One of the leaders that was there is Sakir Har. Sakir means there's a reward. And Leah proclaimed that God has granted me a reward, a Sakar, and his name was Issachar. Coincidence. Jacob and Issachar named by Manetho that these were rulers. Total coincidence, not possible. Well, then we have Salatis, the person who was in charge. And they drop sometimes the is in the Greek because it's a translation kind of thing. But Joseph in the Bible in Genesis 42 is called the governor of Egypt. Not the king of Egypt, not the pharaoh of Egypt, the governor of Egypt, the guy second in command, the guy put in charge. And the translation from other biblical words, Manetho's first haikos, or king, Salitis, seems more like the title, governor. They didn't even call him Joseph. They would have called him governor as a title, like Lord or something, mayor, right? Or like we might say, pastor, even though MJ is his name. Well, that one doesn't seem to fit as well. It's not as nice, but he was there before, and he was formerly a slave. Maybe he never told them his. Maybe he had an Egyptian name, and that's why it's not recorded. We don't know. But the second ruler after Yaqub was Benon. Now, if I was Joseph, and I had died, and I put somebody in charge, just judging by the way things work, what am I going to pick? My older brothers who sold me to slavery? Or am I pick my little bro who I gave 5 times portion to when they came to visit, named Benjamin? But wait, Benjamin had 2 names. And one name was Benjamin. That's what his father called him. But his mother called him Benoni. Benon, Benoni. Another weird coincidence. Either these Semite Hyksos kings have a strange fascination with Israeli names and want to name all their kids the same way, or there's something else going on here. There's no physical proof. No one wrote down Benon is Benjamin, an Israelite from. They weren't called Israelites then. Israel had been renamed less than a generation. He hasn't even died yet in some cases. Why would they call him Israel? Why would they call his children Israelites? But because there's no literal, this is who this person was, people say, well, that can't be true then. And yet, these Hyksos rulers who came down with Abraham, these people, these shepherd kings who helped him establish this area and who did take over that portion of Egypt, the Egyptians were angry that they were taken over. And I don't know about you, but if somebody took over part of my house and I worked real hard to get rid of them, I wouldn't leave the paintings and leave the furniture they had put up. If you busted in my house and took over part of it and you set it up the way you like it, when I got back in charge, I'm not leaving it there. I'm cleaning house. And the Egyptians felt the same way. They literally tried to erase these people from history. Could shepherds be that powerful? Well, maybe they were Amorite kings, but it's also possible that Abraham, with his 318 men, was able to defeat 5 kings, if you believe the Bible, and all their men. Now, of course, they were a bit of a drunken glut, but hey, God gives the victory, he gives the victory. And Isaac got so powerful that the king told him, you have to leave. They filled the wells, so they had nothing to drink. He got so powerful as a shepherd. They're like, no, you have to go away. You can't live in this country anymore. And Simeon and Levi, when their sister was violated, they went and destroyed an entire city. It wasn't 2 guys who showed up and blasted the place. They were shepherds like their father, and they brought their retinue with them, the people who served and worked with them. And they came in, and they were so angry that the place was leveled. And Jacob and Esau, when they argued, Esau had 400 men Jacob had to defeat. Jacob was quivering for miles of hiking all the way there, sweating bullets, thinking he was going to die because his brother's army of shepherds who train in the wilderness to be tough And when they think when Jacob showed up to Egypt, he had 100,000 men with him. If it quacks like a duck, probably a duck. Powerful people from Canaan peacefully moved in, established themselves through agriculture, particularly corn, into the Goshen region. They wear rich colors. They are shepherding. Sounds kind of like a duck. Or Israel, I guess. In Egyptian history, there's a weird part of this where they highlighted that they gathered corn. Manetho writes about the corn that they had collected, which matches the Bible. And Manetho says that they went back and talked about being captives in their sacred books. And he doesn't dispute this. Archaeologists uncovered this multicultural piece to this, but Exodus 12 says a mixed multitude went up with them. They'd been collecting people along the way. It wasn't just Abraham, who had no children at the time. Abraham had no children, but he builds this group with him. And it becomes the congregation of Israel. Not everybody in Egypt was born from Abraham. They had a lot of other people that had been brought into the nation. Everything lines up. The biblical account, the Egyptian reliefs, the Hyksos, writings of Manetho, archaeological evidences, names, culture, the corn, all of it. But it could not have happened, right? If you want to know more, I've only scratched the surface. I've given you some links here if you want to go and look. You can see this on the website soon. I'm not sure when it's up, but soon. You can click on these links. There's so much more you could look at. But I just want to make sure that at the end of the day, when you get to question number 11 at the bottom, name some of the similarities between the Hyksos people. When people say there's no way an Exodus happened, you should be able to tell them definitively, whether they believe in the Bible or not, you don't know what you're talking about. It is Second Sunday. You guys have some break time now. Go and greet one another, get refreshed, come back ready for worship at 11. Thank you so much for being here and be such a great audience. We'll see you guys later.